Baruch Hashem. Today's daf yomi is Avodah Zarah, daf Nun Zayin, Avodah Zarah 57. Today's daf is dedicated for a shmir for the Chayalim, so for the Shvuyim and Yeshua for Am Yisrael. In this East Sarah, today's daf we're going to start on Nun Vav Amabez 56b, 4 lines from the bottom. The Gemara has been discussing a ruling that was given by a Yanuka, a child who was 6 years old, and he gave up psak that if idolater does nisuch with their foot, that's not going to be considered nisuch, meaning to say that that's not going to prohibit the wine if he agitates the wine with his foot. So the Gemara says, in this context, another story. There was an incident in Narda that there was an idolater and a Jew that they were treading on the wine together. And Shmuel didn't paskin for 3 festivals. V'shai Shmuel plus a riglai. Shmuel waited 3 festivals. Why 3? Rashi says, Shai miskabsin l'Shmuel drasha hilchos Pesach v'Pesach hilchos atzeres v'atzeres v'hilchos Chag v'Chag, because he was waiting for them to come in and hear the drashas on Pesach and Shavuos and Sukkot, and then he'd be able to go over it with the other Rabbanim. So the Gemara says, my time. And what was Shmuel's hesitation about? Meaning, say, what was he unsure about? Ilema, maybe Shmuel said, Mishum de Kasavar, because maybe Shmuel was saying, the Mishkachna Tana de Asuk Rabbi Nasan, Osrine, Afilu Ba'ana. He says, maybe I'll find a Tana like Rabbi Nasan, who prohibits it, and then I'll prohibit it even Ba'ana. What is this context here? What does Rashi say? Rashi says on top of 57a that he would prohibit a Tana, if he could find a Tana that prohibits like Rabbi Nasan, Yayin Ba'ana, B'mago Shalom Kochavim. So here we're saying that Rabbi Nasan prohibits the wine by the touch of the idolater, even though the idolater does not intend to do nisuch. The nisuch, that the libation of the idolater is only prohibited, she says, through the movement of the wine. But if he just touches it without moving the wine, then it's going to be, then Rabbi Nasan is going to say it's prohibited even by Maga, but the Rabbanan would say it's not. And so therefore, Shmuel was saying, maybe I'll find somebody like Rabbi Nasan who will prohibit it. The Tanya, because we learned in the Brisa, ma to do bein biyad bein beregel yimacher. Rabbi Nasan omer biyad asur beregel muter. So let's say you measured it. Let's say the idolater measured the wine of the Jew. Bein biyad, whether he did it with the hand, that he stuck his hand in to measure how much wine is there, like we do with a reed. Rashi says that we call a fila. So whether he did it with the hand or whether he did it with the foot, yimachar, it could be sold. The kivan, Rashi says, kivan one is gaving nasach. He didn't intend to do nisuch. He touched it, but there was no intent, and there was no agitation. There was no shilchuch. So whereas Rabbi Nasan says biyad aser beregel is muter. So Rabbi Nasan says with the hand is prohibited, even though there was no, even though he didn't do the agitation, he just measured it. But he says with the foot it'll be permitted. So we see that Rabbi Nasan prohibits it even ba'ana. But the Gemara says, but that's not our case here. That's not our story, because Eimer Damar Rabbi Nasan biyad. Beregel miyamar. Rabbi Nasan doesn't say it's prohibited ba'ana, even if you did the touching just with your foot. Ella. So what was Shmuel suffik about the mishkachna tana deshari Rabbi Shimon isharia afilu b'shtia? He says, if I'll find a tana who allows such wine like Rabbi Shimon, then I could even allow the chevra to drink from such wine. Rashi says, Rabbi Shimon, the shari magal of the kochavim shonaskavin wenaseh. So Rabbi Shimon allows, if you touch the wine if the idolater touches the wine, now kavana to do nisuch, Rabbi Shimon even allows you to drink it. So he said, if I find somebody like that, then I'll even allow this wine that was stepped on by the idolater to be drunk. So that's maybe what Shmuel Suffolk was about. Hahu uvda. So there was an incident. Hold on one second. Hahu uvda. There was an incident. The have bebiram. It was in this place called Biram. The have ove kochavim. Excuse me. The have kosolik bedikla. The idolater was walking up the palm tree. And he brought. He was going down the palm tree, and he brought a lulav with him. The kanachis naga berosha the lulava becharma shelo bekavana, and the tip of his lulav when it was coming down touched without intent. It touched the wine of the Jew. So the idolater is coming down, and he touched it. So we have magal yidei acher, and without kavana. So you have touching through something else, through the lulav, and there is no intent. So Sharia Rav was a bune lulav de kochavim. Rav allowed this wine to be sold to an idolater. He said you can have a benefit from it. So Amalei Rav Kahana, Rav Asil Rav, Amaru da Amar Tinok Ben Yomo, who was the Yain Nesach. Why are you allowing it? We don't require kavana. We don't require intent because Rav, you're the one who says that even if it's a child who's 1 day old, he can turn into Yayin Nesach. So Rav said, Amar Lahu, yeah, when do I say he can make a Yayin Nesach? Imar da Amar Yana V'shtia. I say it's prohibited to drink, but I don't say it's prohibited to have any benefit. So therefore, you could sell such wine which was touched, without intent, it's permitted to sell. Gufa, so now let's analyze the statement. Amarav, Tinok ben Yomo, Ose Yayin Nesach. A child is 1 day old, can turn to Yayin Nesach. So Eitzvei Rav Shimi, Barchil Rav. But what about the following? What about the following brisa? Avadim and Ovdei Kochavim. Let's say he purchases slaves from the idolaters. He purchases the Avadim. Shemalu v'lotavu. And these Avadim had circumcised but not immersed. And Rashi reminds us of the halacha that we're learning in Vamos Memvavam and Aleph, that a person is only converted to Judaism once they do circumcision and immersion. So he's halfway there. Or so too, if you have the Bnei Ashvachos, that you have these shifchos, you have these maids, and their offspring are growing up in your home, and they circumcised, but they did not immerse. Rashi says, Afal Pisha no do Bebeis Yisrael, even though these Bnei Shvachos were born in the house of a Jew, excuse me, they did not, and they weren't raised amongst the idolaters. Bo Milo Tfila, they required circumcision and immersion. We're referring to a case where the mother are not already immersed. Because if the mother had immersed, why would they require immersion? So we're talking about a case where the mother is not immersed to become fully Jewish, and our offspring have not yet done Mila and Tefillah. So in this case, they've done circumcision, but not immersion. So in both cases, we're talking about a person who's done circumcision, but not immersion. Rokan or Midrasan Bishuk Tameh. So if they have spit coming out of their mouth, or they trample on something, then bashuk, even in the shuk, Rashi says, where there, we say generally speaking, Tuma Safek is tahor, where if it's a doubt, it's tahor. But we say that since they the rabbis made a decree that they are like idolaters, that the idolaters are like Zavin and Kol Devrein. And so therefore their spit and their trampling, even in the shuk, will be tamei. The amri tahor. But some respond in the price that it's tahor. And yenon, and what about their wine? Gedolim osa yayin netzach. If they're adults, they make it into this prohibited wine. And if it's ketanim, if they're minors, ein osa yayin netzach. It does not make it into yayin netzach. So why would somebody say it's tahor? Because the Rashi says, because since it's a mil sadol shlichos, since it's an uncommon thing, the rabbis did not make a decree about such a matter. So now, if it's minors, they do not make a yayin nesach. Gedolim make a yayin nesach, minors do not. Ve'eloin gedolim, these are adults. Ve'eloin ketanim, gedolim yodim b'tiv avodas kachavim u'mishamshah. The adults are people who know about idolatry. Where ketanim einam yodim b'tiv avodas kachavim u'mishamshah. Where the minors do not know about idolatry. But anyway, that's the price. It contradicts Rav, because Rav says a tinok ben yomo can make it yayin nesach asar ba'ana. And asr b'shtia, but permitted to ana. But here we say that their wine is yayin nesach. So how does Rav answer this contradiction? First of all, Rav could say tanu palid. Rav could say I'm a tana, and I disagree. But Gemara gives a different answer. Gemara says ketanim mias kedolim in ketanim lo. And ketanim don't make it not yayin nesach. Tirgema abnei shvachos. So the Gemara says no. Explain it when it says ketanim lo. When it says minors do not make them tamei. To not make the yayin nesach, that refers to the bnei shvachos, because since they grew up by the Jews, the rabbis did not make the decree on their wine when they were younger, because they grew up in the Jewish household. So that's the answer. So when it says yayin nesach, that only refers to the bnei shvachos, the minors of the bnei shvachos. So Gemara says havachein kamar, but it says v'chein bnei shvachos, so it means they're the same as the earlier category, and so it's the same as the idolaters. So it says havachein kotani, but it says v'chein. And meaning to say that implies that the law of the avadim that is acquired from the idolaters is similar to the law of the bnei shvachos. So, and not just if they grew up in their home, wherever they're minors. So the Gemara says, Arokon Madras, and that refers to their spit and their trampling, but not to the yayin nesach. Hanicha, Gemara says, Hanicha Mandamar, this only makes sense according to the position that states that their spit and their saliva and their trampling is tamei. But according to the one who says Uman Damar Tahor, but according to the one who says it's Tahor, Ma'iko Amemar. Meaning to say, according to the one who says it's Tamei, the Brisa needs to compare the two in order to teach us that even the Bnei Shvachos, the rabbis made a decree that they will be Tamei like a Zav. But according to the one who says that their Rokan and Madrasim is Tahor, how would we explain the Brisa? Why does he need to tell us? Since the Avadim that are acquired from the idolaters are not Matame, so they were never, even though they were never in the Rishus of Yisrael, certainly it should be the case that the Bnei Shvachos should not be Matamim. So why does it have to tell us that? So how would we explain it? Gemara says, Avadim Dumya de Bnei Shvachos. So it's teaching us that when it says that the law of the Avadim is similar to the law of the Bnei Shvachos. Ma Bnei Shvachos, Melvul Tavlu. That just like the Bnei Shvachos, if they circumcise but they're not immersed, who does a yayin nesach, but Melvul Tavlu lo. Just like it tells us that the Bnei Shvachos, that when do they make a yayin nesach? Only when they circumcise but not immersed. So too, Af Avadim, also Avadim, that when do they make a yayin nesach? When they circumcise but they're not immersed. This is coming to exclude the position of Rav Nachman or Shmuel. The Amar Rav Nachman or Shmuel, the position of Rav Nachman or Shmuel is that if you purchase avadim from the idolaters, even though they fully converted osin yayin nesach. They makes it yayin nesach ad shetishaka avodas kavim mipiem, until the idolatry is forgotten from their mouths. Kamash mandalo. So our brisa does not agree with that position, and our brisa is that as soon as they convert fully, they don't make a yayin nesach. Rav Shmuel is inconsistent with our brisa. So the Gemara analyzes this statement. Gufa Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. Until the idolatry is forgotten from their mouth. How long does it take for the idolatry to be forgotten from their mouth? 12 months. 12 months it takes to forget it. Okay, so we know that 12 months is the reason how long it takes something to forget. That's why it's a custom to have a yard site every 12 months. And that's why when it comes to Parshat Zachar, we want to read it at least once every 12 months. So Eitzvei Rabba or Rav Nachman, but Rabba to Rav Nachman challenges this position of Shmuel. What about the fact? So now we're going to have a whole brisa, but just from the opposite direction. And this way, it's a question on Shmuel. And but anyway, the upshot of Shmuel's position is Katani Mias 57b Mias Malavo Tavlu, that if they circumcise and did not immerse, then under those circumstances, if they circumcised and did not immerse, then their wine prohibits it. But if they were fully circumcised and fully immersed in the mikvah, they fully converted, they did not make it. They did not make it yayin nesach. So therefore, how can Shmuel say that it takes a year to get them out of their yayin nesach? So the Gemara says, Tirgama abanei shvachot. Explain that this idea that if they circumcise and immerse, it does not make a yayin nesach. That only refers to the bnei shvachos. But a regular eved, because since the bnei shvachos grew up in the house of the Jew, they didn't make the decree about it. But the regular eved, it takes a year until their wine does not become yayin netzach. The Gemara says havachein hantani, but doesn't say the bnei shvachos are like the avadim. So the Gemara says no, arokonu midrasa. No, that only refers to their spit and their trembling. Hani chaman damar tamei. It makes sense according to the one who says that it's tamei. That's why I need to teach us that the bnei shvachos are tamei mishum Rokon and Midrasan. That's telling us that they're trampling and their spit is tamei. But according to the one who says tar, if the avadim are tar, for sure the bnei shvachos are tar. So why would it just say v'chein bnei shvachos according to that position? Gemara says a kamashmon avadim dumya the bnei shvachos. The teaching is that avadim are like the bnei shvachos. Ma bnei shvachos kedolim hu those yayin netzach. Tanam enos yayin netzach. This is teaching us that avadim are like the bnei shvachos. Just like the bnei shvachos, the adults are the ones who make yayin netzach, but the minors don't. Also, avadim na migdomos yayin netzach. Tanam enos yayin netzach. But the minors don't. Afukim in the Rav, the Amarav Tinuk Ben Yomo was a yayin netzach. To tell us that it's not like Rav's position. Kamash one to low. So basically, we see that according to this position, Tosfos says we see according to this position that Shmuel does not agree with Rav, who says that Tinuk Ben Yomo can make something tamei. So now we look at this Tosfos here, and Tosfos says, how do we pass him? Because these are questions that were incredibly relevant to their lives. But first of all, wine was basically their only drink. They had wine and beer. And also, Also, wine was the commodity. The Jews would lend out money; they would get paid back in wine. So, if you can't have any benefit from wine, what are you going to do? You're losing a huge commodity that would be exchanged. So, the Tosfos on the bottom of Nun Zayin Beis says, "Upasko halachos gedolos delo kerav." The halachos gedolos paskin is not like Rav Tinok ben Yomo, meaning to say, Rav says a Tinok ben Yomo, a child 1 day old, can make it prohibited. He says we don't hold like that. The Rabbeinu Tam Nami Pasak Kishmuel, and Rabbeinu Tam also, Rabbeinu Hananel Pasak Nami Pasak Kishmuel, the Ba'ina and Shikua, that we require a year after they convert in order to say that their wine has not become tamei. And then the Tosfos continues, the old Pasak Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam rules, Kalishan and Amar Rokon Umidras on the Shuk, that the spit and the trampling in the marketplace of the idolater is tahor. The Bishal Sofrim Halach Achar Mekel. That by a rabbinic law, we follow the lenient position. Ufi Oso Lashon. According to that Lashon, Polik Shmuel Adarav Batino Penyoma. According that we're lenient by and we rule like Shmuel. Va'od Pirsha Rashbam Va'Rivan, the Shem Rashi. So Rashbam and Rivan. Rivan is the German Tosafist, and Rashbam is Rashi's grandson. And they explain in the name of Rashi, Shekosov B'Tshuvas HaGaonim. And it's written in the Tshuvas of the Gaonim. Kibizman Hazeh, that nowadays, Ein Isur HaNoah B'Maga Ovi Kochavim B'Yayin. That if the guy touched the wine, it's not prohibited to have benefit. What does that mean? Let's say you get wine from a non-Jew, and it's not a kosher wine, so the guy touched it, but he didn't worship idolatry with it, so you're allowed to regift it. So the answer would be yes, you're allowed to have benefit from it. Our idolaters are nowadays living amongst us. They don't do these wine libations. So we consider them like they're the children who are 1 day old in the case of Rav. And so therefore, Vav like a tinuk bal yomo. And it's like a child 1 day old. And so therefore, Tosfos writes, Va'al zeh anu somchen. That's what we rely upon. That's what we rely upon, that if a non-Jew owes wine, we can collect it as part of the debt. This is what the Ri sent to Rabbeinu Tam. The Ri was Rabbeinu Tam's nephew, so he's the great-grandson of Rashi. He says, says, but you yourself saw from your father, from your brother, that it's permitted to have wine that was touched by an idolater without having intent for nisuch, even by drinking. Rabbi Shmuel, because your brother Rabbi Shmuel, that's the Rashbam, Pasak b'shem avicha, ruled in the name of your father. Really, it should be. The text takes it out, and Pasak b'shem avi imecha, ruled in the name of your father's mother, Rabbeinu Shlomo Rashi. The overcome is manazeh in chashuvim el katinuk ben yomo. That the idolaters today, they don't really know the idolatry of wine libation, so they're like a child 1 day old with respect to that. V'ata posek betinuk ben yom kishmuel. The islay the eno yayin nesach asar af b'shtia, and you rule by but yet you're ruling by a child 1 day old like Shmuel, who says that they don't make yayin nesach to prohibit it even by drinking, meaning say it should be permitted even to drink. Rabbeinu Tam responded to Ri, he was afraid to paskin. He said, no, we don't say that it's allowed to drink. Anyway, He says that it's prohibited to drink, but there's a huge back and forth. And if you're interested in the intellectual development of the halacha, this is you see the fiery conversation here over the generations between the fact that it seems like Rabbeinu Tam reversed Rashi's position, where it was even allowed to drink if it was just touched, and the one was challenging Rabbeinu Tam. But anyway, the upshot of all this is that if the idolater touched it, it would be permitted to have hana. You can have benefit from it. And that's halacha ma'aseh how we rule today. So the Gemara will just say one more story. There was an incident in Mechuzah. Also, Ovid Kochavim, Ayol Chanusa di Yisrael. He came to the shop of the Jew. He says, do you have any wine to sell me? He said, the Jew says, I have no wine. There was some wine sitting there in a bucket. Shadi beyade. He threw his hand in it. He moved the wine around. He says, isn't this wine? So the Jew took that wine. He threw it into the keg. He says, he was so upset. He says, get off my wine, basically. So Sharia Rava was avune ovdei kochavim. So Rava allowed this wine to be sold. Does not prove to have benefit. He just touched it. But there was a dispute about this, whether or not it was allowed or not. So Nafak Shipur the Rava. So Rava allowed it. So that ruling went out. But Nafak Shipur the Ravuna Barchina. Ravuna Bar Nachman Ba'asri. There was a whole debate here. So that we're going to get into tomorrow's daf. Shkoyach to everybody. We'll stop here. Shkoyach.
Thank you. Thank you.